The morning sunlight poured through Hogwarts' tall windows onto the old stone hallways, marking the dawn of a new day with its warm, golden light. The castle was already buzzing with life as young witches and wizards made their way through the corridors, some walking leisurely, others hurrying along, their robes swishing behind them on their way to the great hall for breakfast. Their chatter was cheerful and lively, much of it still revolving around the grand feast from the night before. And at the same time, inside the alchemy professor's office, Maverick was putting the finishing touches on the lesson plan for his first class for later today. His schedule wasn't particularly busy. The magical science class for 5th years, held at 10 o'clock in the morning, was only scheduled 3 times a week, while the alchemy class for freshmen at 2 o'clock in the afternoon ran 4 days a week. Therefore, compared to other professors, his teaching hours can be said to be quite flexible, as he never had to teach more than 2 classes a day, at least not this year. And true to his word, the headmaster arranged for his classes to include all 4 houses together, unlike the normal practice of pairing 2 houses per class. Dumbledore had ensured that Maverick was assigned 2 spacious classrooms, each large enough to accommodate an entire grade, sparing him the hassle of constantly setting up and packing away materials for each subject. He cast a quick glance at the digital-looking clock on the wall and saw that it was still breakfast time. Soon, the students would be heading to their first classes, and he still had 2 hours before his own began. Leaning back, he settled more comfortably into his seat, his mind briefly recalling the events after the previous evening's ceremony. The banquet had gone much better than he expected, and he was pleased by the overwhelming enthusiasm that followed his little speech. As soon as the ceremony ended, while the students were escorted to their common rooms and the teachers returned to their duties, he, instead of staying at the school, used the Flu network for a quick visit to his home. This wasn't a special privilege solely for him, as he had now come to understand that every professor had their own private Flu point as well in their office. Yet another little detail that differed from the original story, as he couldn't recall J.K. Rowling ever mentioning this in her books. Or perhaps it had been mentioned, and he simply couldn't remember. Back home in London, Maverick spent the rest of the evening with his parents and sister, catching up on things around the house. More importantly, he wanted to hear about little Sarah's first day at school. This was the main reason for his quick visit, as he didn't want her to think he had forgotten such an important day. To add to the excitement, he gave his family a little show, sharing the atmosphere of Hogwarts during the opening ceremony. Needless to say, they were all impressed by the grandeur of it all. Finally, when the time came to retire for the night, he sank into the comfort of his own bed to sleep, before returning to school after breakfast today morning. The castle was never dull, always alive with the hum of student activity throughout the day. One could always spot some roaming the corridors, bags swinging over shoulders, books clutched tightly, and conversations flowing about everything from Quidditch to the timetable. Maverick arrived at his classroom ahead of everyone else. After making a small adjustment to the seating arrangement, he sat comfortably on the edge of his desk, one foot on the floor and the other gently swinging, waiting for the students to arrive. His classroom was arranged a bit differently from the typical Hogwarts layout. The desks were neatly arranged in rows, each row slightly inclined starting from the second to provide a better view. A large blackboard dominated the front wall, while the professor's desk featured a large globe of Earth, surrounded by simple scientific-looking instruments like pendulums in various lengths, a few meticulously placed gears and levers, and a collection of metal rods, each marked with measurements. The walls were adorned with enchanted charts featuring simple diagrams of elements that shifted and changed, alongside basic drawings illustrating fundamental concepts like motion, energy, and force. The room felt both modern and magical, a seamless blend of 2 worlds that perfectly suited the course to be taught there, where magic and science coexisted in harmony. The students soon began entering the classroom, each casting a curious glance at him as they noticed him leaning leisurely on the teacher's desk. He was dressed in a brown long-sleeve shirt, loosely tucked into black trousers, and greeted each student with a small nod and a friendly smile, projecting a confident yet inviting presence to make them feel more comfortable. He soon began to notice that the number of students entering had surpassed the actual number who had chosen the course as an elective. Most of them were seniors, with a few he was sure were from the freshman batch sorted into houses the night before. The stares directed at him only grew more frequent, and the witches, in particular, seemed to care little about hiding their curiosity. He could hear their whispers in hushed tones without even relying on his magical sense as they found their seats. He didn't need to strain his ears to know what they were saying. It was mostly a mix of curiosity about the new professor, speculations about his background, and, of course, the inevitable discussions about his appearance. More and more students trickled in, and to his surprise, the room quickly filled beyond his expectations. Some were familiar faces, like the two Slytherin witches he had met on the train and Roger Davies, who sat at the very back of the class. Two redheads who looked alike were also there. The little Miss Know-It-all sat at the very front, as if she were one of the students who had actually taken the elective. Moreover, she didn't seem to remember seeing him on the train, or perhaps it was Tracy's mouthful which had made her tear up on the spot, that caused her to not register everyone else who had sat in the cabin at the time. The additional students sitting in the class didn't trouble him, though, in fact, he was pleased to see such interest. However, he didn't yet realize that most of the extras were witches, nor did he suspect that their main reason for attending wasn't to actually learn anything about science. As the clock on the wall chimed the hour, the last few students hurried to their seats, and a hush fell over the room. He straightened his relaxed posture, pushing himself off the desk and walking to the front. The classroom was quiet now, filled with expectant faces. "Well, good afternoon to you all," he said, keeping his voice confident yet inviting, a little something he picked up from the old goat leading the school. "Let's begin." However, just then, the doors swung open once again, and in walked a few people Maverick wasn't expecting. Headmaster Dumbledore himself, along with his deputy, the arithmancy professor, and Professor Flitwick. They all smiled at him in unison, the same expression as if they had practiced it before coming in. "Please, don't mind us," Dumbledore said with that characteristic twinkle in his eye. "We're just a few curious souls who just so happen to have some free time. And you did say anyone interested in joining your class was most welcome yesterday." Maverick arched an eyebrow, then shrugged and gave them an inviting nod, gesturing with his hand for them to take a seat as well. "Please, it'll be my pleasure to have such distinguished students attending my lesson," he chuckled. The rest of the students, however, now seemed a little stiffer, especially the extra attendees. Their previously easygoing expressions had changed, with some subtly tugging at each other's robes and exchanging glances, as if they were already regretting stepping into the classroom the moment the lineup of teachers appeared. It was a bit of a funny scene, but he quickly turned his focus back to the task at hand. "Before we get started, let me introduce myself," he began, subtly amplifying his voice to ensure he had everyone's attention. "I'll keep it short, as I'm sure most of you have heard a thing or two about me by now." A small smile played on his lips. "But for those of you who haven't, my name is Maverick Caesar. I was born here in Britain to two wonderful, amazing people with absolutely no magic in them. None that I know of in the family line either. I have completed multiple levels of Muggle education, and completed my magical studies alongside it." He paused briefly before continuing. "What many of you might not know is that I actually homeschooled the entirety of OWL's and Newt's curriculum." The students exchanged curious glances, and some murmured under their breath. This was something very foreign to the British wizarding community, where the idea of homeschooling wasn't really a thing. He continued, pacing slowly from one side of the room to the other. "My magical mentors were Simon Walker, Sarah Walker, and Edward Garling, and finally, took my OWLs and Newts at Ilvermorny School of Magic in America." He paused, stopping at the center before turning to face the class, his eyes sweeping across the students. "Magic. It has fascinated me from the day I awakened it, just as I'm sure it has for all of you. Yet, even after discovering I was a wizard, the things I learned at Muggle schools, the curiosities I grew, the greatness of science, it never left my mind." The students and teachers all saw Maverick's expression grow more passionate and thoughtful. "It was my curiosity for both that eventually brought me here, as a teacher at this wonderful school of magic." He cast a quick glance at the teachers seated at the back, his gaze pausing briefly on Dumbledore, before offering a small, appreciative nod. The classroom had fallen silent, all giving their full attention to him. This was a little trick he had picked up from his own teachers, a small story before the lesson to capture the students' focus. He allowed the moment of stillness to hang in the air for a short while, relaxing his expression as he slipped his hands into his trouser pockets. "Science," he began, pausing with a chuckle. "I'll try my best not to make this class dull, especially for those of you from Muggle backgrounds who already know a thing or two." He paused, glancing briefly at a few students, his eyes passing by little Miss Gryffindor, whose eyes shone brighter in concentration than anyone else in the class. "This will be a class of science and magic, and trust me, when they meet, that's when the real magic begins." He gave a small wink to the whole class, just enough to spark their curiosity. Maverick stood confidently at the front of the classroom, his eyes sweeping across the rows of curious students. We're here to uncover what science really is, then dive into what makes it different from magic, what they have in common, and, most importantly, what happens when the two come together. He was a professionally trained espionage agent, skilled in the art of precise word choice, subtle body language, and compelling expressions. By using these skills, he made it feel like the students were hearing an exciting story, naturally capturing their attention. So, what is it that Muggles call science? He asked, pacing slowly across the front of the classroom. Is it of any use to us? Or could we even use it in the first place? The room was silent. This year, he continued, his voice softening slightly, we will come to understand the answers to these questions, piece by piece, and today, I'll explain what science is in the simplest way I can. After that, I'll show you a glimpse of the endless possibilities it holds, possibilities that, I hope, will change how you see the world. He paused, giving the students a moment to absorb his words, and waited to see if anyone had questions. No one did. All right, let's begin with the simple question. What is science? He gave the students a moment to think. Yes? He asked, nodding toward the little witch in the front of the class, whose hand shot up immediately. Science is understanding how things work, she answered, doing her best to sound confident. Exactly, Maverick said, pointing at her with a smile. Miss Know-It-All for a reason, he thought, his eyes glinting with approval. What's your name? Hermione Granger, Professor, she replied, fidgeting slightly, now aware that the entire class was focused on her. Well, Ms. Granger, 5 points to the House of Lions. Her face brightened immediately. The earlier stiffness disappeared as she beamed with pride. Maverick turned to face the class again. Science is about understanding the world. He paused, then added with emphasis. Through logic, science is, in the simplest of terms, cause and effect. He flashed a small smile at the students. Why did I say through logic? Well, let's think about magic for a moment. He glanced across the students. Magic is not logical. You cast a spell and something happens according to the spell you intended. Or, in other words, according to your intent. But you can't explain why. It simply does. Magic does not follow logic the way science does. The students looked puzzled, their brows furrowing. Only the teachers seemed to understand. Maverick knew it would take more than a simple explanation to make these young witches and wizards grasp the difference. This was an unfamiliar concept to them. He turned and walked toward his desk, the students' eyes following him in eager anticipation. He picked up a small ball, prearranged for the demonstration. Returning to face the class, he tossed the ball into the air twice before looking back at Hermione. Here, catch, he called. She was startled but quick with her reflexes, easily snatching the ball out of the air. Maverick nodded in approval, a smile forming on his lips. Now, he said, addressing the class once more. You all saw me throw that ball to Miss Granger. The logical explanation would be that the force from my hand, he gestured with his hand to illustrate, made it move through the air and she caught it. This is cause and effect, or as the Muggles phrase it, the law of motion, a basic principle of science that applies to everything. He studied the faces of the students and noticed that only a few seemed to understand, while most still looked uncertain. Now watch, he said, retrieving his wand, which everyone saw him pull from the holder strapped to his wrist. As all the students watched in silence, Maverick flicked his wand, and the ball floated from Hermione's hands and back to him. Did you all see that? He asked, holding up the ball. When he looked at their expressions, he realized they had misunderstood. I'm not talking about the levitation charm. I'm talking about how it happened. There was no force or reason that made the ball float to me. It just did. That's because of magic. Unlike science, there's no clear cause and effect explanation for it. Instead, the cause is replaced by my will. And that, children, is what magic is, shaping the world with your will. He paused, teasing the class. Now, you might ask, what's so impressive about cause and effect, or this so-called law of motion in science when magic, like what you saw just now, can cause things to happen at will? The students exchanged glances, unsure how to respond, but Maverick could see they were starting to grasp the subtle difference between magic and science. His voice softened. That simple action of me swinging my hand to throw the ball, the force that made it move, understanding the how and why behind it is called science. Muggles have done just that, figured out the principles behind this law of motion, why and how the ball moves the way it does when thrown, And let me tell you, this has allowed them to do things that even we magicals would consider impossible. None of the students' expressions showed that they believed the last part of what he had said. Of course, it was expected. Magicals were a proud bunch, even if they disagreed with one another. They wouldn't easily believe that science could do things that magic could not, just because he said so. He decided it was time for the next demonstration and held the ball out in his palm, showing it to the class. Without any wand or incantation, he made the ball float for a moment before transfiguring it into the shape of an aircraft. It was small, about a meter long. A few students gasped, and even the professors appeared genuinely impressed by the seamless transfiguration. "Who can tell me what this is?" he asked. A few hands shot up. "An airplane." "Correct," Maverick said, smiling. "This here is an aircraft. Of course, the real ones are much, much bigger than this. It's used by muggles as a means of transport through the air. Can fly faster than the quickest broomstick, and it's larger than even the biggest dragons alive today. It can also fly continuously for longer than any dragon, and weighs as much as 500 tons. That's over 1,000,000 pounds. The students stared, unsure of where Maverick was going with the explanation. Maverick glanced toward the teachers sitting at the back of the room. "Professor Flitwick," he called, and the small half-goblin teacher, who had been lost in concentration, looked up, startled. "Ah, yes, Professor," Flitwick responded, his voice slightly flustered. "Very simple question, Professor," Maverick said. "You are one of the few great maguses in the world, one of the most powerful people alive today. Would it be possible for you to levitate 10 Hungarian horntails at the same time?" "What?" Flitwick blinked, confused by the randomness of the question, but quickly collected himself in almost the next moment. The other professors, including Dumbledore, chuckled in amusement. Cough. The charming professor of charms cleared his throat. "I mean, I could maybe manage 2 or 3, but 10 would be impossible." He glanced at Dumbledore. "Perhaps, Headmaster. Unfortunately, levitating 10 dragons is beyond even me." Dumbledore interjected with a smile, his eyes twinkling as he looked across the class. Maverick noticed that the students were now looking at Dumbledore and Flitwick with awe and admiration. "You see, children, what I'm trying to say is that with science, it's possible. Using science, it's possible to make an aircraft, which is dozens of times more massive than the largest dragons, fly at incredible speeds, much faster than the fastest Quidditch broomsticks, while the most powerful among us just admitted that it would be impossible for him." The students listened intently, their expressions growing more serious. By understanding cause and effect, by learning the logic behind why things happen, muggles are able to do incredible things. Maverick continued, his tone passionate. That is science. Learning the mysteries of the world, the how and why behind everything that happens around you every day. He paused, glancing at the students, who now seemed to finally grasp what he was trying to say. One of the students, a 6th year who had actually chosen the course as an elective, raised his hand. "Please," Maverick gestured for him to speak. "Professor, you say muggles studied this force that, after you throw a ball, it moves through the air and falls somewhere else. But I don't understand how it can move a big object like an aircraft." "Excellent question." Maverick clapped, looking at him appreciatively. "Remember what I said about muggles naming this force a law?" he asked, looking at the student, then across the class. They all nodded after a moment, and he continued, "Well, this law isn't something they invented. They just figured out how it works. Also, the reason why such a heavy object like an aircraft can move through the air involves a lot of complicated scientific knowledge, like aerodynamics, gravity, relativity, combustion, and more. These are also laws of science muggles have studied and learned to manipulate. Only when all of these laws work together does the aircraft fly. But even if you study with me every day for the next 2 years, I cannot teach you exactly how it functions. All you need to know is that these scientific laws work together to make it possible. And the law of motion can be said to be the core principle of it. It's like in magic, without magical energy, even if you have intent, emotions, the correct incantation, the best wand, and knowledge of the skill, you cannot cast magic." The student who asked the question nodded, though still more puzzled than realization from the looks of it. "I know it sounds complicated. That's why we're here. Over these next 2 years, I'll simplify and teach you the most important laws of science. I will teach you the basics of Muggle biology, chemistry, and physics. So when you graduate, you'll have a more profound understanding of everything you see. It can even help you in magic, because remember what I said in the beginning. It's when science and magic come together that the real miracles happen. Maverick observed the expressions on all of the students. If he had to guess, he'd say that they had understood about 30% of what he had explained the whole time. But he wasn't disappointed, because with his last demonstration, he was sure that all of the students would realize the greatness of science. He smiled, looking at the silently listening class. I have one last demonstration to show you today. It's also related to the law of motion, but on a much grander scale. And let me tell you in advance, this will blow your mind. The students perked up, their attention fully locked in. Even those who had seemed bored before were now focused and intrigued. All right, if you would all focus your attention on me. Please stand up and close your eyes. Professors, that includes you, he said, glancing across the students before turning to the teachers. The students and teachers rose to their feet, following his instructions, some with curiosity, while the teachers wore expressions of amused anticipation. 1 second, 2 seconds, the classroom was utterly still. 3 seconds, with a casual wave of his hand, he transfigured the tables and chairs, making them vanish, while the inclined rows leveled seamlessly into a flat surface. Using precise magical energy manipulation, he ensured everyone remained steady, preventing anyone from losing their balance. Simultaneously, he flicked his finger, casting the spell Illugio Lunam Lectorum, now at master-level proficiency, and silenced any noise that would have accompanied the transformation. However, for this demonstration, he used a watered-down version of the spell, ensuring that the professors present could easily dispel it with a mere thought if they wished. He had no intention of revealing the full extent of the spell's capabilities. At its master proficiency level, the spell was so refined that he could manipulate all their senses with just a simple gesture, confident that even the Archmagus Dumbledore would be fooled for a time. Moreover, if a wizard of Dumbledore's rank were caught off guard and not directly attacked, they would remain unaware of the deception for as long as he desired. And if even an Archmagus could be deceived so thoroughly, there was little chance that anyone of a lower rank could resist his arrangements. Do not be alarmed by what you see, he said calmly, and slowly open your eyes. As the students obeyed, a collective gasp filled the room, some students even grabbing on to their friend, while only a few thought to remain calm. In their perspective, they were no longer in the classroom, nor weren't even inside any contained space. Instead, they found themselves hovering in the air, or so it seemed, and below them lay the entirety of Hogwarts Castle, its grandeur fully visible. Do not be concerned. This is a variation of a confusion spell I created, Maverick explained. For those of you who have experienced watching a memory through a pensieve, you may understand what's happening now. And for those who don't know what a pensieve is, allow me to explain. It's an alchemical creation that allows you to view another person's memories, immersing you as if you were there in that very moment yourself. Likewise, you are now in an illusion spell. What you are seeing is the world in my mind. You're still inside the classroom, but your sight and hearing are being manipulated by me. He glanced at the professors, who were watching him with a mixture of amazement and curiosity. If it helps, breaking free from this illusion is quite simple. Just close your eyes and focus for a moment to break free from the illusion, and it will cancel the spell. He reassured them. This was true and intentional. Once again, he had no intention of revealing the full extent of the spell's capabilities. For the professors, a quick pulse of magic will easily release you as well. But I suggest you all hold off for now, or you might miss what I'm about to show you. With a subtle smile, he continued, in this demonstration, I want to show you the power of scientific laws, how the law of motion, which we discussed earlier, works on a much grander scale. Spreading his arms wide, he added with an excited expression. Beyond that, this will also give you a glimpse into the perspective of the world through the eyes of a muggle. And by perspective, I don't mean mere guesses or theories. I mean actual facts, what they've discovered about this world, and even beyond it. The students listened intently, their amazement still fresh as to what they were seeing. Many turned their heads and bodies, whispering to each other as they looked around in all directions, trying to absorb the surreal scene unfolding before them. I need all of your attention on me now, he said, amplifying his voice so it reached every person present. This will be a journey, one I assure you will stay with you forever as an unforgettable memory. He waited until everyone's focus was solely on him. Then with a smile full of excitement, continued, we are about to go on a journey. He raised his head to the blue sky, to the stars. Inside one of the classrooms at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, something quite extraordinary was happening. To an omniscient observer, the classroom would seem completely empty of desks and chairs, leaving only an open space where students stood scattered, their heads turned in every direction, left, right, up toward the ceiling and even down at the floor, as though they were seeing something entirely different from the reality in front of them. And, in a way, they were. "I need all of your attention on me now," Maverick called out, his voice magically amplified to carry across the room. Only a few students seemed to notice his voice, as the strange scene in front of them had completely captured their attention. He didn't hurry them, and instead allowed time for everyone to process and calm down. The 4 professors were calmer than the students, but the admiration in their eyes was hard to miss. He saw them smile warmly as they slowly walked toward him, coming to a stop beside him with expressions of clear appreciation. "What ingenious magic, Professor Caesar," McGonagall remarked, her smile warm and motherly. "You must teach me the principles behind this. I can already think of so many ways it could be useful for teaching the students." Maverick had no objections to sharing knowledge with the professors, however, it would be a very weakened version of the spell. With his current mastery and understanding of its principles, he could easily create a simpler version, one that only affected sight and hearing, and not the other senses. His mastery and knowledge came from the miracle of the system, so he had no worries that the professors could develop it to the level of his real spell. Because the advanced proficiency is a level of understanding which is extremely profound in the recognition of the system, one that cannot easily be achieved simply by studying the spell in one's free time. Not to mention his proficiency is even beyond advanced level. He smiled brightly at her, showing a hint of shyness. "Thank you, Professor. This spell was developed by me and Teacher Edward, with inspiration from a lot of sources, like the pensive, as I mentioned earlier, and I would be happy to share the notes with you." He glanced at the other professors as well. "All of you." The professors nodded in thanks, offering some more praise as they waited marveling at the result of his magic that was unfolding before them. Meanwhile, the students gradually began to calm down, and a few moments later, their excited chatter faded into hushed anticipation as they turned their full attention back to him. "Well, now that you're all ready, let us continue." Just as he thought he could finally move along with the demonstration, several hands shot up eagerly, their owners practically vibrating with curiosity. Letting out an inward sigh, Maverick gestured to one of the students whose hand was raised so high it looked as though they might take flight themselves. "Yes, go ahead, Professor." The little wizard's voice trembled with excitement. "Are we really just under a confusion spell, and not actually flying over the school?" The other students followed, nodding vigorously with the same unspoken question. Maverick took a moment to glance around the children, his eyes sweeping over the curious faces before he answered. "I can assure you we are still inside the alchemy classroom. If you take a good, deep breath, you'll notice the familiar scent of the classroom is still there. No wind, no open air, just the same old stone walls." The students took a deep breath, their expressions changing from doubt to realization as the familiar sense reached them, nodding with their curiosity momentarily satisfied. "All right, if the rest of you had the same question, I trust your doubts are now clear." He continued without a pause. "Today, in our final demonstration, I will show you some of the principles of science that Muggles have studied and learned to use, on a much grander scale, of course. And at the same time, I will reveal some of what Muggles have discovered about our world. To do this," he said, his voice brimming a little, "we will have to take a journey." The students' faces glowed with anticipation as they listened intently to him speak. Even the Weasley twins, who had somehow ended up in this class for some strange reason he doesn't know and whom he had thought might cause a ruckus, were behaving like model students, giving him their undivided attention. "Now, if you look down," he said, gesturing toward the floor, "you can see our school, Hogwarts. If I had to guess, our current height is about 1 kilometer above the tallest tower." The students followed his gesture, their eyes sparkling as they took in the sight of the castle below for the umpteenth time. "From this distance," he continued, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, "it looks rather small, doesn't it?" The students nodded, some grinning while others still too awestruck to speak. Now that their professor had pointed it out, the castle did seem incredibly small from this height, more like a toy model than the vast, sprawling fortress they called school. "Okay," he said, his voice rising slightly. "We shall go higher now, and again, do not be alarmed because you think we are ascending, but this is just an illusion. Think of it as moving pictures, not your actual selves." With a graceful wave of his hand, the scene around them began to shift once more. The ground fell away, and the students felt as though they were soaring upward, higher and higher, until the castle was nothing more than a speck below them. Despite his reassurance, some of the students instinctively grabbed onto their closest neighbor as their body's reflexes kicked in. The scene darkened as they passed through a wispy cloud. A few yelps of excitement or fear escaped the children as they rose higher still, until they were floating in the vast emptiness of space, the earth hanging below them like a brilliant blue and green painting. Maverick stopped their ascent and gave the students a moment to take it all in. They stared down at the planet, their faces a mixture of awe and wonder, murmuring to their friends in hushed voices, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the illusion. After a moment, Maverick spoke again, his voice amplified slightly to carry over the murmurs. Our world's atmosphere is divided into several layers, he explained. And as you go higher, the air begins to thin until, eventually, there's nothing left to breathe. We are now above the atmosphere in a layer Muggles call the thermosphere, about 500 miles above the surface, which, if this was real, you would die in moments. With another wave of his hand, the illusion shifted once more, showing the earth half in daylight and half in darkness. The students watched, transfixed, as the sun set on one side of the planet, casting half of it into shadow. As you can see, he said, the sun has set on this side, leaving it in darkness, while the other side remains bathed in light. A witch near the front raised her hand, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Maverick nodded, gesturing for her to speak. Professor, she asked, her voice trembling with curiosity. What are those glowing lights on the dark side? Maverick smiled, pleased by the question. An excellent observation. But before I answer, let me ask you this. Can any of you spot Hogwarts from here? The students peered down at the earth, their eyes scanning the surface. After a moment, they shook their heads, though a few pointed vaguely in different directions, their guesses wild and hopeful. The correct answer, Maverick said, his smile widening, is that you cannot. From this height, Hogwarts would be smaller than a grain of sand. But those lights you see, those are Muggle cities and towns. Because Muggles use electric lights to illuminate their streets and homes, the sheer number of them makes it possible to see their settlements even from here. Even the professors standing beside him were no exception, as this kind of perspective was a first for them as well in their entire lives. Unfortunately, Maverick continued, wizards rely on lanterns and flames for light. While charming, their glow isn't bright enough to be seen from such a distance. And because our settlements are smaller and more scattered, they remain invisible from here. The students glanced back and forth between Maverick and the earth below, their expressions slowly changing as they processed the information. For many of them, it may as well be the first time they had truly considered the scale of the Muggle world, and the sheer number of people who lived in it. It's rather amazing, isn't it? Maverick said softly, his gaze fixed on the planet below. Even from this distance, we can see that the world is alive, bustling with civilization. And for that, we have the Muggles to thank. The students all nodded in unison. In the face of undeniable facts, there could be no arguments, unless one wanted to make a fool of themselves. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was some soft murmurs as they stared down at the earth. Their perspective forever changed. Suddenly, a sharp yelp broke the silence, cutting through the awestruck murmurs. Professor! A voice cried out, trembling with alarm. What is that? Something's coming our way. All heads turned in the direction the student was pointing. In the distance, a small object was growing larger as it hurtled toward them. Gasps rippled through the group as the object rapidly approached, its metallic surface glinting in the sunlight. That, Maverick said, his voice calm but amplified to carry over the rising chatter, is what Muggles call the International Space Station. As he spoke, the massive structure zoomed overhead, its speed faster than anything that had ever seen. The little witches and wizards ducked instinctively, their faces a mixture of shock and wonder as it passed just above them. Maverick couldn't help but chuckle at their flustered expressions. Author's note: ISS was launched in 1998, but here I've made changes to the timeline of its launch. The International Space Station, he continued, is a massive mechanical structure built by Muggles and launched into space to study various scientific phenomena. It's about the size of a Quidditch pitch and orbits the Earth at a speed of, he paused, his eyes twinkling, 17,000 miles per hour. To put that into perspective, at that speed from this distance, you could travel halfway around the world in less than an hour. Hands shot up immediately, most of them from students with no Muggle background. Maverick scanned the room and pointed to a witch with short, spiky hair and dark, curious eyes. "Yes, miss?" "Tonks, Professor," she replied, her voice eager. "Can you explain how Muggles send such a huge thing all the way up here? And how does it move so fast?" Maverick studied her for a moment, briefly recalling the name and some memories. Without showing no outward expression to it, he answered, "Well, Miss Tonks, the full explanation would take quite a while, but I'll give you the short version. Muggles invented a machine called a rocket." With a wave of his hand, a three-dimensional projection of a rocket appeared in front of the class. The students leaned forward, their eyes sparkling with fascination. Unlike the aircraft we discussed earlier, rockets fly straight up into space. Attached to these rockets are parts of the said International Space Station. Muggles send multiple rockets into space, each carrying different sections of the station, and then they assemble it all together like a giant puzzle. What you just saw flying past us is the result of their efforts. He paused, letting the information sink in before continuing. As for your second question, why it moves so fast, that's due to the laws of gravity and motion, among other scientific principles. He glanced around the room and saw their expressions perk up with curiosity. To explain gravity in simple terms, think of it as the pull between two objects. For example, when an apple stem weakens, it falls to the ground. That's gravity at work. It's what keeps us grounded on Earth. Without it, we'd float around aimlessly, drifting in all directions. Up, down, left, and right. Muggles have studied this fundamental law along with many others, and used them to understand and manipulate the motion of objects like the space station. He smiled warmly. For those of you in Muggle science, we will delve deeper into these concepts later. For now, just know that what you're witnessing is the result of centuries of Muggle ingenuity and discovery. The students all nodded, looking thoughtful. Tonks gave a small nod of understanding, though he knew that just this simple explanation wouldn't clear her doubts completely. "Now," Maverick said, his voice taking on a more adventurous tone, "our journey is just beginning, children." He turned and pointed toward a glowing orb in the distance. "Look that way. What do you see?" "The moon!" several students exclaimed in unison. "Correct," he said, his eyes gleaming. "Now relax and just enjoy the experience." With a graceful wave of his hand, the illusion changed once more. To the students, it felt as though they were moving again, this time toward the moon. Gradually, the lunar surface grew larger, its craters and plains becoming more distinct as they drew closer. Maverick turned to face the class, showing an expression of quiet excitement. "From this side," he said, gesturing toward the moon, "you can see it growing larger as we approach. But if you look behind," he paused, allowing the students to turn and gaze back at the Earth, "you'll notice that our home is growing smaller." The students gasped, their eyes darting between the moon and the shrinking Earth as they turned their heads back and forth. The sight was utterly mesmerizing, a view, quite literally, out of this world and beyond anything they had ever imagined. "We are now traveling incredibly fast," Maverick continued, "even faster than the International Space Station you saw earlier, because the distance between the Earth and the moon is nearly 400,000 kilometers. To give you a sense of scale, you could fit about 30 Earths in that gap." One of the students, unable to contain his excitement, blurted out, clearly not even registering what he had just said. "Professor, are we really going to the moon? This is so cool. I can't believe this is happening." Maverick chuckled, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Yes, we are going to stop by the moon. But very briefly," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "This journey will take us much, much further, and let you see the true majesty of the universe we live in." The students erupted into excited murmurs, their faces alight with anticipation. Maverick cast a quick glance at the professors beside him and saw that they, too, were equally thrilled, if not more curious about what was to come next. The journey was far from over, and the wonders of the cosmos awaited. The group of students and teachers watched in amazement as the moon came closer, its silvery gray surface showing countless craters and jagged edges, with shadows becoming clearer and more detailed. Excited murmurs filled the air, but then faded when their perspective stopped, and the class became completely captivated by the sight before them. "Observe the many impact marks on the surface," Maverick began after giving the students a moment to take in the scene. "The craters you see were formed by meteorites, rocks from space, colliding with the moon's surface." He watched as they all stared in fascination, letting a moment of silence pass until one of them tentatively raised a hand. "Go ahead." He gestured for the student to speak. "Professor, why doesn't Earth look like this? I mean, the moon looks like it's been hit by so many meteorites." "An excellent question," Maverick said with a pleased smile tugging at his lips. "The answer is a bit complicated, but I'll explain it as simply as I can. It's because of a combination of scientific principles, gravity, motion, and something called air resistance. Understanding these concepts fully requires grasping the basics first. That is the main objective for me teaching this Muggle science class, to help you make sense of such phenomena. And I promise, by the time you graduate, you'll be able to answer these questions on your own." The student who asked the question perked up happily, likely one of the sixth years who had chosen the course as an elective. Maverick smiled and then glanced around, noticing the growing curiosity in the room. "Well, I shall explain anyway and try to keep it as simple as possible." He paused before continuing. "Earth doesn't look like the moon because our planet has what you call an atmosphere, or air, surrounding it. For example, think of a quaffle in Quidditch. When you throw it, it starts off fast, but as it travels further, it slows down and eventually stops or is caught. That's because of air resistance, the force of the air pushing against it. In the case of meteorites, when they enter Earth's atmosphere, air resistance slows them down, or even burns them up, before they can hit the ground." He let that words linger before adding, "This same principle, air resistance. The principles of this air resistance is applied by Muggle to their inventions made to fly like airplanes. Their designs account for these forces. And while we, as wizards, often overlook such things, Muggles spend every day studying these laws of nature, using their knowledge to create and innovate." With a flick of his hand, he then projected a 3D image of the Wright brothers' first airplane, animating it as it wobbled into the air. "This is how Muggles learned to fly. Over time," he waved his hand again, and the image changed to show the evolution of airplanes. "They went from wooden contraptions like this to massive, metal machines capable of carrying hundreds of passengers. And all of this happened in the span of less than a century." Dismissing the projection, he turned back to the scene. He noticed the students, and even the teachers, seemed a little different, their expressions perhaps showing a newfound respect. It might have been the first time they truly grasped just how extraordinary Muggle ingenuity could be. "All right, let us move on." He smiled while saying, then, with a simple gesture, pointed toward the Earth. "Look at our home. I mean, really look at it. From this distance, it seems so small, almost like a moon itself, doesn't it?" The students turned their gazes to the floating orb, their expressions ranging from awe to quiet reflection. Maverick let the moment linger before raising his hand again. "Let's move a little farther away." And with a wave, their perspective changed once more. The Earth and its moon shrank further into the distance until both were visible, the moon orbiting its larger companion in a steady motion. "As you can see, the moon is about 1/4 the size of the Earth. Observe its movement." He made another subtle gesture and accelerated the time flow. The Earth spun on its axis, while the moon traced its elliptical path around it. Notice how the Earth's rotation causes night and day. The sun's light bathes the Earth, and whichever side faces it experiences daytime. A few students nodded, their faces lighting up with understanding. "And the moon," he continued, "why does it revolve around the Earth? Does anyone know?" The silence stretched, but this time no student seemed to know the answer. Maverick smiled, then continued, "It's because of gravity. The Earth's gravity pulls the moon toward it, keeping it in orbit. At the same time, the moon's momentum keeps it from crashing into the Earth. It's a perfect balance, like a dance between two partners." He snapped his fingers, conjuring another projection before the class. The students straightened, their attention caught by the glowing, three-dimensional animated image of a bludger tethered to a string. Taking the string in his hand, Maverick began to spin in a circle. "Imagine the bludger is the moon, and the string represents gravity. As I spin it, the string keeps the bludger from flying away." He quickened the motion, the bludger whirring in a tight loop. "Now, what do you think happens if I let go?" One hesitant hand rose, a curly-haired girl in Ravenclaw robes. "It would fly away, Professor?" "Exactly." Maverick released the illusionary string, and the bludger shot off, zooming past the students before vanishing with a faint pop. Without gravity, the moon would fly off into space, no longer held in orbit around the Earth. The class murmured in realization, even the professors standing at the back nodding in understanding. "This balance," Maverick explained, Between gravity pulling inward and motion pushing outward is what keeps the moon circling the Earth instead of crashing into it or flying away. It's as if the moon is constantly falling toward the Earth but missing it because of its spiraling speed. He paused, scanning their faces. And this balance isn't just about orbits. Creates tides. The moon's pull on Earth affects our oceans. Without it, life as we know it would be drastically different. A hush fell over the group as the weight of his words sank in. Then Maverick smiled, his tone softening. Understanding these principles helps us appreciate the wonders of our world. With a subtle turn, he pointed toward two faint dots in the distance. Now look there. See those two glowing specks? That's Mars. And over there, Jupiter. The illusion changed again, their vantage point moving closer to the red planet. Maverick spoke as they traveled. The distance between London and New York is about 3,500 miles. The distance between Earth and the Moon. He paused, gathering their curiosity. 250,000 miles. And Mars? It's over 150 million miles away. As they approached, the red planet came into view, its dusty surface shimmering faintly under the magical light. The students leaned forward, expressions alight with wonder. "Professor," a Gryffindor blurted out, unable to contain their excitement. "Is this really what Mars looks like?" Maverick chuckled. "Indeed, Muggle telescopes have captured images detailed like this, but we'll save that for another lesson. For now, enjoy the view." The Weasley twins exchanged grins, their whispers carrying just enough for Maverick to catch. "This is brilliant, Fred. Who knew coming to see the new professor in action would amount to such a show?" "Absolutely, George. The best decision we've made since joining Hogwarts." Maverick allowed himself a quiet laugh before giving the class a moment to soak it all in, their excitement filling the space like a tangible energy. "I know this is all very fascinating, but it's time to move on, children," Maverick called out after a moment, drawing the students' attention back to him. "All right, first, I want you all to take another look at our home over there," he said, gesturing with his hand. "That tiny dot over there. That is our home." He paused, letting the image of the distant Earth sink in before continuing. "Just like when you look at the night sky and see Mars as a small, glowing. From here, our home appears as nothing more than a speck of light." He waved his hand again, and the scene began to shift. "Now, as we move closer to Jupiter, which is about 500 million miles away from Earth, that little dot representing our home planet will become fainter and fainter." The illusion kept on changing, pulling them faster, until Jupiter came into view in all its majesty. "This is Jupiter. It's the largest planet in our solar system, so massive you could fit over 1,000 Earths inside it, 500 million miles away from where we live. Just imagine how far that is." The students murmured in amazement, their eyes glued to the colossal gas giant. Maverick offered a few more facts about Jupiter before moving them further into space. He showed glimpses of Saturn's iconic rings, the icy blue of Neptune, and finally zoomed out to reveal the entire solar system. For the first time, the students saw all the planets revolving around the sun in their elliptical orbits. They stared in awe, marveling at the sheer vastness of the system and how small Earth seemed in comparison. Maverick allowed the scene to linger before the illusion changed once again. The sun, once stationary, began gliding forward through the black expanse of space. Around it, the planets continued their intricate dance. "Professor, why is the sun moving?" a student asked, their voice filled with curiosity. Maverick smiled. "The answer lies in the same force we've been talking about. The same force that makes an apple fall from a tree, that keeps the moon in orbit around the Earth, and that causes the planets to revolve around the sun. The same principles of science Muggles are studying and using what they have learned to invent incredible innovations that has allowed them to transform their way of life, moving from traveling by horses and boats to sending massive structures into space. All in just a span of decades." He gestured toward the sun. "Watch how these very laws of science unfold on a grand scale. Just like how the Earth moves through space because of the sun, too, moves through space, pulled by something far greater than itself. Something so vast and mysterious that Muggles have only just begun to understand it." He turned to the class. "Observe this magnificent dance. Even those of you studying astronomy may not have seen the solar system from this perspective." Gasps of amazement filled the room as the students watched the sun, leading its family of planets through space, spiraling forward like a shepherd guiding a flock. "The sun doesn't stay in one place," he explained. "It moves through space, pulling the planets along with it in a grand, magnificent spiral. After a moment, the illusion expanded, pulling back farther. Tiny pinpricks of light began to appear in the distance, gradually brightening. Maverick gestured toward the stars coming into view. These are stars, just like our sun. Some are smaller, others much larger. Some are blue, some are red, and many are the same color as our sun. And there are countless billions of them scattered across. So many, in fact, that I can't even begin to project the unimaginable numbers in this illusion. The murmurs grew louder as more stars appeared, filling the space around them. Maverick didn't wait for any questions this time and continued, pointing to one star before zooming in briefly. Each of these stars has its own solar system, with planets and moons orbiting it, just like ours. With a dramatic motion, Maverick zoomed out even further. The stars blurred, stretching into countless lines of light, and the students' gasps grew louder as they turned their heads in every direction, watching the scene unfold before them. The countless dots of light began to shift, transforming into glowing clouds, until, at last, the Milky Way galaxy emerged in all its glory. Its spiral arms stretched across the scene, resembling rivers of light flowing through the vastness of space. What in the world is that? It's like a giant vortex. The murmurs of students filled the space as they watched the familiar yet unfamiliar shape unfold before them. Maverick noticed even the professors were visibly intrigued, barely able to restrain the flood of questions forming in their minds. "This is a galaxy," Maverick said softly, his voice carrying through the room, subtly enhanced by his magic to echo with dramatic effect. "Our galaxy, our home, the Milky Way. It contains billions of stars like our sun, and trillions of planets like the ones in our solar system. It's so vast that traveling by any normal means would be impossible." "Professor, can you give an example like you did before?" a student asked eagerly, looking at him with anticipation. Maverick smiled, his gaze sweeping across the class of adults and children, all now hanging on his every word. "The fastest thing Muggles have measured is light," he continued. "Light can travel 300,000 kilometers in 1 second. Can you imagine how fast that is?" He paused for a moment, letting the information sink in, before chuckling lightly. "Well, imagine you are light. That means you can travel around the Earth 8 times in just 1 second. And the speed of light over a whole year? That's almost 10 trillion kilometers. And our galaxy," Maverick gestured toward the swirling expanse before them, "is so vast that light would take 100,000 years to cross it. What you're seeing there is 10 trillion kilometers multiplied by 100,000. That's how immense it is." The room fell silent as the students processed the numbers and the size of the vortex of stars in front of them. However, the unimaginable scale that had just been explained to them left them with nothing but speechlessness. Maverick let the image linger, watching as complicated expressions slowly spread across the children's faces. When he sensed it was time, he spoke again, his voice soft but imbued with meaning. "Remember to always remain humble, no matter how powerful you think you are, whether because of your family name or your individual achievements. On the grand scale of the universe, you are smaller than even a speck of light." The students all nodded in unison, with no questions in their eyes. For many, this was the first time they truly grasped how vast, complex, and extraordinary the universe was. If only they knew this was just the beginning. The word galaxy was something the young witches and wizards at Hogwarts rarely came across. Even in their astronomy lessons, the focus was on the movements of nearby planets, the phases of the moon, and the magical influence of the stars. Planets, stars, and even constellations with their mythological names were studied more for their links to magical rituals, prophecy, or historical significance than for any real understanding of scientific ideas like distance or size. So, when it came to grasping the scale of what lay beyond the solar system, or rather, not even the solar system but simply beyond Earth's atmosphere, their understanding could be considered practically non-existent. Now, standing in wonder as they gazed at the vast, sprawling beauty of the Milky Way, the word vast had truly come to life for them. They had left Earth behind, passing the moon, the planets, the sun, and even other suns. They had learned facts that stretched the limits of their minds. Distances so vast they were almost impossible to grasp, and sizes so enormous they felt unreal. What they saw wasn't just images or lines from a textbook. It was something they had witnessed and experienced as a journey, step by step. For the first time, they truly understood how big the universe was, how complex, how beautiful, and how unbelievably vast it could be. While the students were still processing everything, the adults who were more collected, took the moment to clear up some of the thoughts running through their minds. Needless to say, the four professors were just as impressed as the students by everything they had seen. Moreover, they all agreed that the class had been one of the most enlightening experiences of their lives. Even Dumbledore, with all his centuries of accumulated wisdom, admitted that much of what Maverick had shared was entirely new to him. Before long, the students turned their attention back to him, eager for more. However, Maverick had no intention of continuing beyond what he had already shown them. He believed that what they had seen was enough to make them think differently about science and its possibilities. "I know you're all eager to see more," he said. "But unfortunately, this is where we'll end the demonstration for today." The students' faces fell, and a few hands shot up, but he gently stopped them. "If your questions are about what you've seen today, you're welcome to join the next Muggle science class. I'll answer them then." He glanced around at their eager faces. "But before we finish, I want to revisit the main point of today's lesson." The room fell silent. "First, come closer," he instructed, beckoning the students toward him as he prepared to undo the transfiguration. Then, with a snap of his fingers, the desks, chairs, and inclined floor smoothly returned to their original state, noiselessly and seamlessly within moments. With a dramatic final clap of his hands, and as the sound echoed, the students watched in astonishment as their perspective rippled and dissolved like smoke, fading away until they were back in their familiar classroom. "Without realizing it, you've all been standing and enjoying the lesson with me for nearly an hour," he said with a small chuckle, seeing their dazed expressions. "So, please, take your seats first." The students spread out across the classroom and settled into their seats, though their faces showed reluctance as they realized the entertaining lesson had come to an end. "Now, at the start of the lesson, I explained what science is, and I'd like to end with the same idea. But this time, I'm sure you'll understand it better." Maverick spoke, looking at the faces turned toward him with undivided attention. "We've learned today that science is all about understanding everything happening around us," he began. "We've seen examples right here, like why an apple falls from a tree instead of floating up, and examples farther away, like why the moon orbits our world instead of crashing into it. We've also realized that by studying these concepts, you can truly understand the world around you. And once you understand it, you have the power to change it, improve it, or use that knowledge to create something entirely new." The room was silent as the students absorbed his words, their eyes filled with curiosity and wonder. Maverick smiled, a deep sense of satisfaction washing over him, knowing he had sparked something in them, who had been in the dark all this time about the outside world. Time passed slowly, and before long, the bell chimed, signaling the end of the class. "To the sixth years who chose this course," Maverick said, sweeping across their attentive faces. "Before our next class, write a brief summary of what you've learned today. Keep it simple, just explain in your own words what science really is." He gave them a warm smile, the lesson winding to a close. "Well, that's all for today." Reluctantly, the students began filing out of the classroom, their hesitation clear in the way they lingered, the unwillingness to part with what they just experienced. And once the last student had exited, only the professors remained. "Professor Caesar," Dumbledore said with a warm smile, as the group gathered around him, "thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. This has been one of the most enlightening experiences I've had in quite some time." McGonagall nodded in agreement. "The headmaster's right. Honestly, this is the first time I've seen such expressions from students when leaving class, instead of their usual eagerness to be done for the day." The other professors nodded in agreement, each offering their congratulations. "Well done, Professor," Flitwick said with a twinkle in his eye. "You've certainly left an impression." "Quite a remarkable lesson," added Professor Septima with a warm smile. "I'm sure the students will be talking about this for a long time." "Do you have any other classes today?" McGonagall asked. Maverick nodded. "I have alchemy with the first years in about an hour. Hopefully, they'll be just as interested as this class was." Dumbledore smiled kindly. "I have no doubt they will be, Professor. You've proven you're more than capable of capturing their attention." "Thank you, Headmaster. Honestly, the students' reactions were much better than I expected. I was worried they might not be interested in such an unfamiliar subject." "You've underestimated yourself," Flitwick said with a chuckle. "After what they saw today, I doubt any student would skip your class. If anything, you can expect an even larger crowd next time." Maverick laughed, shaking his head. "Well, let's hope they're not just coming for the spectacle," he replied with a grin. I'd like to think they're here for the learning, too. Well, I don't know about you all, but all that time feeling like a student again has made me starving. Dumbledore chuckled, his eyes twinkling. That reminds me, Professor Caesar, McGonagall said, turning to him. I didn't see you at breakfast today. Maverick smiled, shaking his head. I had a quick breakfast at home. Needed some time to clear my mind before the class. So I went back last night and returned this morning. I see. McGonagall nodded. Well, you're joining us for lunch then? Maverick chuckled. Of course. The group made their way to the Great Hall, where lunch was already underway. Meanwhile, word of the Muggle science class began to spread through the castle like wildfire. Students from all 4 houses whispered about it in hallways and common rooms, each retelling more elaborate than the last. What had started as talk of illusions turned into rumors of an actual journey through the stars. Some were even claiming that the professor had taken them flying into space, with no mention of it being an illusion at all. Though not everyone believed the tales, even the skeptics couldn't deny their curiosity. After all, it wasn't every day that a professor's teaching methods became the talk of Hogwarts. As Maverick sat in the Great Hall with the other professors, he noticed the curious glances directed his way. Whispers filled the air like a low hum, and students would nudge their friends, sneaking quick looks at him before returning to their meals. You've become quite the celebrity today, McGonagall remarked from her seat beside him, a small smile playing on her lips. That was honestly faster than I expected, Septima remarked. We came straight here from the class. Maverick merely smiled, unbothered by the swirling rumors and curious glances. His mind was already focused on his next lesson with the first years that afternoon. After lunch, Maverick returned to his office, savoring a brief moment of peace to clear his mind. About an hour later, feeling refreshed, he headed to the alchemy classroom, prepared to begin the next class on his schedule. The sun had passed its peak, bathing Hogwarts corridors in bright afternoon light as students chatted and made their way to their classes. The topic of everyone's gossip was the new elective course professor, with whispers of his unconventional teaching style and how fascinating the first lesson had been for those who attended spreading quickly through the castle. Daphne Greengrass and Tracy Davis strolled side by side at an unhurried pace, heading toward their next scheduled lesson. One spoke softly while the other's voice brimmed with excitement. Their conversation centered on the most recent gossip spreading through the castle. Seriously, these rumors are getting more and more ridiculous every time I hear them, Tracy said, throwing a sideways glance at her companion. Daphne shrugged casually. It was bound to happen. People love exaggerating. But Tracy paced a little faster, then turned her sparkling eyes to meet her friends. That magic was really incredible. Do you think he'll teach us something like that? Daphne rolled her eyes. Do you seriously think that's some basic first-year spell? Besides, he's not the charms professor. Tracy grinned mischievously. Still, what if we just ask him to teach us? Her voice took on a playful, persuasive tone. Daphne sighed, shaking her head. I don't think you've listened to a word I've said. The 2 Slytherin witches soon reached their destination, and the moment they opened the door to the classroom, a wave of bustling noise hit their ears, making it feel as though they had stepped into Diagon Alley on a busy afternoon. They paused in their tracks, momentarily taken aback by the sheer energy of the room. The classroom was large, dimly lit, but not so much that it was difficult to see across it. Rows upon rows of desks and chairs were arranged in a half-moon shape, each row slightly inclined from the one before it. It resembled a set of stairs leading down, with the teacher's space at the center, just a large desk and a chair behind it, facing an open area in front that was somewhat larger than the rest. The layout was familiar to the 2 girls, who recognized it as similar to the Muggle science classroom, though this one was noticeably bigger. And rightfully so, because students from all 4 houses filled nearly every seat, their voices overlapping in an excited hum that made the classroom feel more like a celebration than a lesson. Blimey, Tracy muttered, her eyes widening slightly. Aren't there a bit too many? It's not surprising. Professor Caesar's alchemy lessons combine all 4 houses. They made their way through the crowded room and slipped into a pair of empty seats, catching fragments of animated conversations around them as they settled in. Needless to say, the professor's name was on every witch or wizard's lips, talking about his earlier class as if they had been right there with him. The 2 girls tried their best to ignore the gossip-filled chatter and glanced around the class, attempting to spot the subject of everyone's conversation, but to their disappointment, he was nowhere to be seen. The professor's not here yet, I guess. We still have a few minutes, Daphne responded to her friend, keeping her calm as she settled into her seat. "Hey, Greengrass." But then, she heard a familiar voice, annoyingly familiar, call out her name from the right. Turning her head, she saw the pompous blonde looking in her direction. "I heard you two were the only Slytherins who went to Professor Caesar's class. Is what they're saying true?" Daphne raised an eyebrow, but then a memory surfaced, and she couldn't help it as a rare smile tugged at her lips. "Professor now? Wasn't he supposed to be a squib? Or have you forgotten calling him that to his face?" She saw her idiot housemate visibly stiffen, sitting there at a loss for words. As for Malfoy, it could be said that he hadn't had the best start since stepping onto the train for school. First, it was the famous boy who lived, giving him no face in front of his entire year. But the worst of it all was that he had let his arrogance get the better of him and insulted someone he most definitely should not have. He had been trying to forget about it, but the embarrassing memory he had worked so hard to bury since yesterday resurfaced once again, and he couldn't help but feel a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He remembered all too clearly how his father had warned him to tread carefully around certain individuals. Maverick Caesar, the new professor and a master alchemist, was one of those people. His father had emphasized repeatedly that his soon-to-be professor of alchemy was the kind of wizard even the Malfoy family couldn't afford to offend. But, of course, he hadn't known that when he had first met the professor. His sharp tongue had gotten the better of him, and in his usual arrogance, he had called the man a squib before even knowing who he was. Now, every time he remembered it, a wave of mortification washed over him. "I didn't mean it like that," Draco muttered, looking anywhere but at Daphne. Daphne's smile widened, though her voice remained smooth. "Of course you didn't, but you did." She saw the Slytherin blonde gulp, hesitating to speak. Whether out of fear or something else, he finally looked at her with a pleading expression. Can you help me apologize to him? You know I wouldn't have said it if I'd known earlier." Even for someone as introverted as Daphne, she couldn't help but find the blonde boy's current embarrassing behavior amusing, a stark contrast to his usual arrogant self. Then, a loud burst of laughter erupted beside her, and she didn't need to look to know it was her friend Tracy, nor why she had finally lost her battle to keep it in. "Honestly," Tracy said, rubbing the corner of her eye as if wiping away an imaginary tear of laughter. "For a second there, I thought someone was impersonating Draco Malfoy. Then, she barely held back another fit of laughter. Then I remembered you sticking your stinky foot in your idiot mouth yesterday." Unbeknownst to them and to any student present in the class, Maverick was already there, listening to their chatter the whole time while casually leaning against his desk. He shook his head with a smile, then turned his attention away from the group of Slytherins and glanced at his wrist to check the time. It was almost time. He glanced over the sea of students once more, counting at least 100 or more in the room, far more than what had been depicted in the books. Perhaps this was the correct number, he thought, recalling an interview with J.K. Rowling where she mentioned that Hogwarts had about 1,000 students at any given time. He dismissed the thought with a shake of his head. There was no point in dwelling on such details. This was his world now, not the one from a storybook. With a final glance around the room, he snapped his fingers. The sharp sound rang out like a thunderclap, echoing through the classroom and instantly silencing the chatter. Just as he was about to cancel the disillusionment on himself, the classroom door swung open with a loud thud, startling everyone. At first, Maverick thought another group of teachers had come to observe his class again. But then he saw two young wizards hurrying in, looking like they'd just run a marathon. The students, who had just been silenced by Maverick's sharp snap, also turned their heads toward the newcomers. "Whoa! This is way bigger than Professor McGonagall's classroom," one of the boys exclaimed, his eyes wide as he took in the room. He seemed completely oblivious to the heavy silence and all the eyes now on him. "I don't see the professor. Let's just find a seat," his companion said quickly, ignoring the comment and urging him along. "Right? The first boy glanced around, and only then did he notice the entire room staring at them. "Harry, why's everyone staring at us?" "Well, that's because," Harry muttered, "we're bloody late. Now hurry up and move." The two, Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, started walking down the rows of desks, glancing left and right as they searched for empty seats. "Merlin's beard," Ron grumbled after a moment. "Why do the only seats left have to be in the front row?" "Doesn't matter. Just go." The pair quickly made their way to the front, ignoring the whispers that followed them, and slid into the only two vacant seats. They both let out a sigh, as if they just narrowly escaped something worse. Late again. Honestly, Ronald, Harry, a familiar voice called in a clipped tone. You're going to cost us points. Again. They turned to their right and saw their bushy-haired housemate sitting in the same row, separated from them by another girl. We got lost. Again. Ron defended, throwing up his hands. This school's too bloody big, you know? You can't blame us for that. At least this time, I don't see any cats, Harry added with a sly grin, earning a muffled laugh from Ron. Hermione huffed and crossed her arms. Maverick watched the so-called Golden Trio, Hermione Granger and her two dumb friends, with faint amusement. He wondered if he should pull a stunt similar to McGonagall's dramatic entrances just to see their reaction. But before he could entertain the thought further, another equally idiotic voice cut through the classroom. Potter, I told you it wouldn't do you any good hanging around with that Weasley fool. Draco Malfoy's drawling tone carried from somewhere behind them, dripping with his usual arrogance. Ron didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Somehow, Malfoy's voice had the kind of quality that etched itself permanently into his memory after that single unpleasant encounter. Shut your mouth, Malfoy, Ron snapped, spinning in his seat to glare at him. At least I didn't call the professor a squib. The whole bloody school knows about it now. The room erupted into a chorus of chuckles, with several students casting Malfoy pitying glances while others smirked at his expense. Draco, for once, had no retort, and his face flushed a bright shade of pink as the sting of humiliation settled in. Ron, encouraged by the laughter and feeling like the hero of the moment, stood up on his chair. He stretched out his arm dramatically, pointing a finger at Malfoy as if delivering a theatrical proclamation. That's right. You called Professor Caesar a squib, he declared, his voice ringing out over the murmurs. And you know what? I heard it from one of your slimy snake friends. So you better behave, Malfoy, or I'll remind the professor about it every 10 minutes of the class. Ron puffed out his chest, clearly expecting another wave of laughter to follow his bold display. However, the reaction he expected never came. The seconds ticked by, and instead of laughter, the classroom grew unsettlingly quiet. Frowning, Ron opened his eyes and glanced around. That's when he noticed the other students weren't looking at him anymore. Their eyes were fixed somewhere behind him, their expressions ranging from sheepish to downright panicked. Mr. Weasley, came a calm yet sharp voice that sent shivers down Ron's spine. Mr. Weasley, the calm, sharp voice sliced through the silence, causing Ron to flinch and sending a shiver down his spine. He didn't need to turn around to know who had spoken. He had walked right into another one of the professor's traps. Hundreds of eyes were on him, some curious, others amused, but most flicked between him and the figure behind him, filled with pity. The weight of their stares made his stomach drop, and heat rushed to his face in embarrassment. He swallowed hard and turned slowly, finding the person everyone at Hogwarts had been talking about standing casually in front of his desk, watching him with amusement. Gulp. Professor, would you mind sitting down first, Mr. Weasley? Contrary to what he was expecting, the professor's tone wasn't sharp or reprimanding. Instead, it was calm, almost kind, as though they were speaking to him gently. So he hurriedly stepped off the chair and sat down properly, but his eyes were fixed on the desk, too embarrassed to look up. He cast a quick sideways glance at his friend and noticed Harry also had his head down. Was Harry trying to spare him the embarrassment of suffering alone? He thought. His chest swelled with emotion, and his eyes stung with the urge to cry, touched by how much his friend, no, his best friend, seemed to care for him. Unbeknownst to Ron, Harry's reluctance to look up had nothing to do with standing by him. He was just terrified that the professor might have overheard his earlier comment about the cat. It was when Ron stood on the chair to argue with Malfoy that Maverick canceled his disillusionment charm. He was honestly speechless at the little redhead's foolish behavior and couldn't help but wonder how this idiot managed to conquer the smartest witch of their generation. Nonetheless, he had no intention of punishing them over some silly argument. If anything, he preferred to see his students get along. Detention, in his eyes, was nothing more than overtime babysitting, a waste of time he could spend far more productively. Walking to the center of the classroom, he glanced over the rows of curious faces, pausing briefly on each one and observing the students while offering the best professor smile he could muster as possible. He didn't want to play Snape or McGonagall and would rather be someone more approachable in the eyes of his students. He saw the sea of faces, some exchanging glances, some looking expectantly at him, while others leaned forward slightly, all waiting for him to speak. "Good afternoon." A soft hum of his greeting was returned, but only a few seemed to speak. "Well, it seems only a few of you think this beautifully bright afternoon is good, isn't it?" "Good afternoon, Professor." This time, the whole class spoke in unison, and Maverick nodded to everyone, his expression showing approval. "Welcome to the class of alchemy. Before we get started, I'll give a short introduction of myself." He then repeated what he had said in the last class, telling the students a bit about himself, his education, and his background. The students all listened attentively, with only a few noble airs whispering among themselves at the mention of his Muggle education and his teacher. He didn't mind, though. Scrutiny was inevitable. After all, they had grown up knowing almost nothing significant about the world outside their own. Well, with that out of the way, let's begin. Then, wasting no time, he posed his first question, making sure to maintain a kind smile as he glanced across the rows of students. "Can anyone tell me what alchemy is?" Swish! A few hands shot up, and he pointed to a young wizard with the Ravenclaw badge pinned to his uniform, gesturing for him to speak. "Please state your name first." The boy stood up, trying his best to look as confident as possible. "I'm Terry, Professor. Terry Boot. And alchemy is crafting magical items." Maverick smiled warmly at the boy and he gestured for him to sit. "An excellent answer, Mr. Boot. 5 points to Ravenclaw." Mr. Boot's answer, though a bit reductive, is a correct description. Alchemy is the magical art of transformation and creation. It involves the careful crafting of magical objects, using runes to channel and direct magical energy, and applying charms to imbue those objects with specific properties. It's a comprehensive approach to magic that demands both precision and creativity. He turned his attention to another raised hand at the very front, looking eagerly at him. "Yes, Ms. Granger?" "Professor," Hermione inquired, "is it the same runes that are taught in the elective course Ancient Runes?" Maverick nodded. "Very observant. To answer your question, Ms. Granger, ancient runes are indeed used in the creation of alchemical items. In fact, most multipurpose magical items are created using ancient runes. However, for this class, until the elective course begins, we will only be using basic runes." He explained further. The main difference between ancient runes and basic runes is that ancient runes let you inscribe much more complex instructions and handle greater magical power. Basic runes, on the other hand, are simpler. Think of them as the basics without the same depth or flexibility. For example, if basic runes are like simple numbers from 0 to 9, ancient runes are more like a mix of numbers, letters, and symbols, making it possible to create more advanced magic. He paused, looking around the room before turning back to Hermione. "Does that make sense?" "Yes, Professor," Hermione replied, looking satisfied as she sat back down. Maverick continued. "To make a product that can be considered an alchemical creation, it must have 2 properties, runes and charms. The crafting can be either natural or man-made, but you will rarely see naturally formed objects turned into alchemy without any alteration to their structure. In fact, it's nearly impossible because the process of carving runes changes the very structure of the object. In this class, we'll mostly focus on the basic set of runes. Now, I know that might sound boring, but it won't just be about memorizing symbols and their meanings. We'll also be creating alchemical equipment as we go," he added, watching as the students all perked up, exchanging excited whispers at the mention of creating their own alchemy. "As for charms, I believe that part will be handled perfectly well by Professor Flitwick. In fact, in my class, I'll be referring to his lessons to see which charms you've learned and plan the practical lessons accordingly." He smiled. "And finally, we will dedicate 1 day of every month to learning the art of crafting. And it'll be more fun than it sounds." "All right." He clapped his hands together. "Today is the first day, so I want to make it memorable for you. First, please take out your basic runes textbooks and turn to page 78. The room came alive with the rustling of pages and the soft thuds of books being placed on desks. Maverick waited while scanning the room until every student had their book open. What you'll see there is the basic rune for light and illumination. Today, we're going to use this rune to create a basic alchemical light source. He noticed the student's eyes light up at the prospect of diving straight into creation, and a smile tugged at his lips. "Observe carefully," he said, extending his hand. With a deliberate motion, he cast the flagrate spell, moving his finger through the air to draw a symbol. A simple, angular shape resembling a flame with a single line rising upward. The students gasped, their eyes sparkling with wonder as they watched Maverick effortlessly use magic. "This is Lucy's." Maverick pointed at the glowing symbol. "It's a basic rune that represents light and illumination. When inscribed correctly and infused with magical energy, it can produce a steady, glowing light. Unlike ancient runes, which can sometimes create complex, self-sustaining enchantments, Lucy's requires a direct input of magic to function. Think of it as a match. You need to strike it to produce light, but it won't burn on its own." As he spoke, he walked over to his desk, where stacks of smooth, flat stone cards were neatly arranged. Each card had one side made of stone and the other covered with a crystal-like surface. With a wave of his hand, the cards floated into the air one by one, hovering briefly before gently descending onto each student's desk. "What kind of spell was that?" one student whispered to another. "Maybe a very advanced variant of the levitation charm," came the reply. Maverick sighed inwardly, realizing once again how much he took his own magical abilities for granted. To these children, even the simplest acts of magic for him were extraordinary. The room became a buzz of whispers and murmurs, but he needed to continue with the lesson. "All right?" He amplified his voice slightly to cut through the chatter. "You can discuss everything else later, but for now, I need your attention." He walked to the center of the room, holding a similar stone card in his hand. "In your list of required materials, there should be carving instruments. I hope everyone has them with you." He glanced around and nodded to see that no one seemed to have forgotten. "On your desks are special stone cards made from materials used in carving practice. They are also half-complete alchemical products, which I hope to see finished by each and every one of you before the end of the lesson." The students picked up the cards, turning them over in their hands and examining both sides carefully. "You'll notice a faint mark outlining the symbol you see above me on the silver side," Maverick continued. "I want you to use the glyph blade to carefully carve over it." Now, the glyph blade itself is an alchemical tool, much like a wand. Instead of casting spells, its purpose is to channel your magic into the carving you make. Otherwise, it would just be a simple mark on the stone. He paused, looking seriously over the class. "Please be careful with the blade. Don't rush. You have 15 minutes, and it's just one symbol that is already outlined for you." Seeing the students nod in acknowledgement of his warning, he relaxed his expression, and his lips curved into a smile. "I'll walk around to each of you in the meantime to check your work. You may now begin." Following his instructions, the students buzzed with excitement, chatting eagerly to one another about the work they were about to do. Maverick saw the little redhead's face light up with a peculiar gleam as he spoke to Harry. "Harry, this is so cool. I bet Fred and George are going to be super jealous that we actually became alchemists today." "You're not going to become an alchemist in one day, Ronald. We're merely just carving over an outline symbol." "Do you even know the ranks of alchemists?" Sure enough, it was his future wife who put him in his place even before Harry had even thought of a response. Ron glanced at Hermione irritably, then at Harry, before whispering to him, "Mental, that one. How does she even have time to listen to other people when she's so focused on what she's doing?" Harry sighed, honestly speechless, not knowing what to say. He didn't want to take Hermione's side over his friend, but he also knew Ron's earlier comment sounded stupid. "Just focus on the work, Ron, before the professor comes and checks," Harry said in the end, carefully holding the glyph blade as instructed in his textbook. The alchemy classroom buzzed with the quiet murmur of students and the steady sound of activity. Most of the class was hunched over their desks, faces set in deep concentration, while others whispered to their neighbors, discussing the work they were about to start. In their hands, each one held a peculiar object, something between a spatula and a quill, no longer than a hand, sleek and black in color, with one end pointed to a sharp tip, etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shine faintly. They handled it carefully, eyes focused on the rectangular card in front of them, occasionally glancing at the textbook beside it, as if checking the instructions. Meanwhile, Maverick moved steadily between the rows of desks, scanning the students' work as he went. His footsteps came to a stop beside a Gryffindor student, noticing the young wizard looking far too nervous for the task he assigned. He saw the boy's eyes flicker nervously between the card on his desk and the glyph blade in his shaking hands, struggling to keep the sharp tip steady. "Good afternoon," Maverick spoke as softly as possible, careful not to startle the already nervous boy. Despite this, the little wizard wearing the Gryffindor badge on his uniform flinched in surprise and sat up straight, like a soldier caught off guard. Fortunately, He managed to keep a grip on the sharp blade in his hand without sending it flying across the room. Maverick frowned inwardly. This was an unusually strong reaction, as if the boy had been on edge for much longer than just the work assigned to him. "Are you all right?" he asked, keeping his tone as gentle as possible. "Why, yes, Professor," the boy stammered, stumbling over the words. "What's your name?" he asked, making a mental guess about the boy's identity. "Neville, Professor. Neville Longbottom." Sure enough, this is the hidden child of prophecy, Maverick thought, recalling the early descriptions of his character in the books. It seemed to fit well with his current behavior. "You can relax, Mr. Longbottom. Do you have any doubts or difficulties with the carving?" Neville hesitantly glanced up at his professor before quickly lowering his head. "Why, yes, Professor. I don't have any difficulties." Maverick didn't press further. "Then can you resume the work? I hope you don't mind if I take a look." At his words, the Longbottom heir's hands trembled slightly before he forcibly steadied them, gulping nervously and giving a hesitant nod. Watching the boy once again attempt to carve the symbol's delicate lines, Maverick decided to offer some assistance. The few students who had been quietly observing the exchange saw Maverick raise his hand and open his palm. Over his palm, a ball of white mist began to form and swirl, gradually morphing until it took the shape of a beautiful raven. Gasp! A collective audible intake of breath rippled through the room as the students stared in astonishment. Whispers broke out among them as they pointed toward Maverick, making others turn their attention as well. Soon, the classroom buzzed with the hum of chatter, all eyes casting toward him. Maverick sighed inwardly, thinking he might be getting too used to performing advanced magic casually and probably should watch out for any audience while doing so. Shaking his head while ignoring the students' murmurs, he let the raven flap its wings and slowly land on Neville's shoulder. The boy was already wide-eyed, staring at him, but as soon as the Patronus landed on his shoulder, his expression softened and a faint smile formed. "How do you feel, Mr. Longbottom?" I feel happy, Professor." "Good," Maverick nodded. "What about your nervousness? Is it better now?" Neville paused for a moment, his eyes lighting up with realization. "It's gone, Professor. I've never felt this relaxed before," he said, turning his head to gaze at the shimmering raven perched on his shoulder. Maverick smiled. "Then, could you please get back to work? I'll stay and watch." The little Longbottom nodded and, reluctantly, moved his hand away from the raven and grasped the glyph blade. With a deep breath, he pressed the sharp tip against the stone card and began to carefully trace the faintly outlined symbol. "You're pressing a bit too hard there," Maverick said, kneeling beside him. "Remember, the glyph blade channels your magic, not your strength. A lighter touch with precision is what you should aim for, not force." Neville nodded, taking the advice to heart, and adjusted his grip, his brow furrowing in concentration. Giving a nod of approval to the young man, Maverick stood up and glanced around. He saw that the rest of the class had now stopped working and were staring at him, whispering among themselves. "You can all talk, but please do so while working," he said, raising his voice just enough to be heard by everyone. "If there are any difficulties, raise your hand, and I'll come to help." Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The hands went up like a wave, and Maverick wasn't sure if it was because they were all struggling with the task or if something else was going on. He pointed to a familiar Slytherin girl. "Ms. Davis. Professor, this is discrimination. Why does the Gryffindor?" Before she could finish, her friend quickly covered her mouth, but Maverick realized what was going on with the entire class. He glanced around the classroom, then let out a sigh. "I might end up regretting this," he thought, before raising both hands in a dramatic motion. As the students gasped, 2 spheres of white mist began to form over his palms, swirling before growing in size. They grew steadily from the size of tennis balls to basketballs and then even larger. Whoosh! With a soft burst, the 2 mist spheres exploded outward, and the scattered smoke began gathering into different pots around the room. There were about 100, and as the smoke swirled, it took the shape of ravens, flapping their wings as they flew to each student, landing gracefully on their shoulders. The murmurs in the room grew louder, and some, like the loud redhead in the front, even started laughing loudly like a baboon. Maverick amplified his voice and spoke in a serious tone. "Don't expect this in every class. It's your first day, so think of it as a little something from your professor. Now focus back on your work. You have only 10 minutes left of the 15 I gave you to finish the task. Daff? Look." It's so beautiful. I feel so happy. Ahaha. Even Daphne, who was usually aloof, couldn't help but smile at the sight of her friend, laughing stupidly while playing with her feathery companion. She glanced at her own raven, twinkling her fingers through its form. I've seen my father perform a corporeal Patronus, she said thoughtfully. He would take time to gather his emotions first before casting it. But I don't think there are any records of anyone performing the spell this effortlessly. No wand, no chant. It was like breathing for him. I know, right? Tracy giggled. Hey, let's ask the professor to teach us the spell. Daphne chuckled. The Patronus charm was clearly having the desired effect on her, but she wasn't about to fall into the same level of crazy as her friend. No. Maybe some other time, she replied with a smirk. The professor will still be teaching us for another 7 years. We've got time. For now, let's focus on the work. I'm already halfway done. Ah, this is boring. Tracy pouted but complied, getting back to work. Meanwhile, in the front row, Hermione Granger was giggling as she played with her own white bird of mist, just like most of the other students. What an incredible spell. It's making me feel so happy and so confident. She glanced to her right and called to her recently made friend. Susan, do you know what spell this is? The girl wearing the Hufflepuff badge on her uniform nodded happily. It's the Patronus charm, a very advanced spell. Aunt Amelia once showed it to me. A little further away, the two Gryffindor troublemakers were struggling to stop laughing. One had started, and the other, unable to control himself at the sight, joined in, both of them laughing like two little crackheads. As all this happened, Maverick stood at the back, watching his class caught up in the chaos he had caused. A regretful look crossed his face. This was not my brightest idea, he thought with a sigh. Fortunately, as the most sensible among the young witches and wizards began working on their cards, the rest eventually followed suit. Soon, and 10 minutes later than the time he had originally set, the children managed to finish carving the runic symbols onto their stone cards. He walked back to the front of the class and glanced across the rows of students who were all showing bright smiles. I take it everyone is done? The entire class erupted in a loud, "Yes, Professor," with some even shouting it. He glanced to the side, where the redhead was grinning like a fool. The urge to drag him to detention flared up for a moment, but he quickly buried the thought, convincing himself, it's not worth it. The Patronus scattered around the room remained beside each student, as he hadn't cancelled the magic yet, unsure of the consequences. However, he made a mental note to never repeat such an act in future lessons. Now, if you could all please be silent, he said, trying to steer the class back on track. We just had a fun practical moment, but it's time for the theory part. Looking around, he saw the students obliging to his request, quiet, but still smiling brimmingly at him. He sighed inwardly and moved on to the next part of the lesson. As I mentioned at the start of this lesson, alchemy involves crafting, runes, and charms. He paced slowly in front of the class. The crafting was already done to the cards before they were handed to you, and what you did was add the final rune to the runic circuit. You'll learn more about runic circuits in your second year, but for now, all you need to know is that as long as the rune you carved was properly imbued, the runes on your stone card should now be complete. Finally, after pacing back to the center once again, he said, Now we move on to the final part, the charm. Alchemy classroom. Standing amidst the sea of quiet yet overly enthusiastic students, Maverick smiled faintly and began explaining the third step in basic alchemy. We now move on to the final part of today's lesson, enchanting. The students exchanged glances, nodding excitedly to one another. It was common knowledge that alchemy required years of practice and dedication to produce even the simplest functional item. Yet here they were, about to complete their own projects. Even if it was just a basic item, the thought filled them with pride and excitement. This step, Maverick said as he started pacing slowly, is what brings your creation to life. The rune you've carved and imbued forms the foundation of its structure. But a structure without purpose is lifeless, isn't it? Even though the joyous emotions from his Patronus still resonated with them, it didn't affect their ability to give their full attention to his explanation. Professor, called Hermione Granger from the front row, her hand shooting up, could you explain what you mean by the structure? Maverick smiled and walked over to her desk. He picked up the stone card she had been working on, the Lucy's rune carved neatly into its surface. The structure, he said, holding the card up for the class to see, is represented by this card. He returned to the center of the room with Hermione's work in hand. Slowly, he levitated the card, raising it halfway to the ceiling. With a sharp snap of his fingers, he cast an enlarging spell. The card grew steadily, reaching nearly 2 meters in height, hovering in the center of the classroom, large enough for everyone to clearly see the intricate details. He made it rotate slowly, halting when the carved rune faced the students. "Ms. Granger," he glanced at Hermione, who was now blushing slightly but still focused intently on his demonstration, "has done excellent work carving the Lucy's rune precisely along the outline." He gestured to the rune on the enlarged card. "The purpose of this alchemical creation is simple: to make a glowing magical item. This card has already been crafted into its shape before it was given to you. So, the first step was completed for you. Keep in mind, the structure doesn't have to be a card. Could be a ball, a cube, or even an irregular shape. What matters is how you want your creation to look and whether it's possible to carve runes on that particular shape." The students listened carefully, absorbing the information. "The second step," Maverick continued, "is adding runic instructions. In a simpler term, carving the rune. That step is also complete now, as you've all carved the Lucy's rune onto your cards." He gestured to the enlarged card hovering above him. "There are other runes hidden on your cards, but for now, don't worry about them. Think of the runes as pieces of a puzzle. The one you carved was the final piece that made it complete." He paused again while scanning the room to see if anyone was having difficulty understanding. When he saw none, he nodded in satisfaction. "Good, let's move on. The third step is adding a magical spell to provide energy to the structure. The charm activates the runes, allowing them to function as intended. However, it's not as simple as waving your wand and casting any spell. The charm must match the runic instructions. In other words, you can't use a levitation charm on an item designed to glow. The runes are specific. They have meaning and react to specific types of magic." He paused, looking thoughtfully at the students to make sure they understood the meaning, then decided to emphasize the point once more, as it was the most crucial element of any enchantment. "Remember, children, runes are precise magical instructions. Each one has a purpose and they respond to specific spells. The process of charming the runes requires focus and precision. You can't just wave your wand, cast some random spell, and expect it to work." He paused again, scanning the room for any signs of confusion while tapping his wand lightly against his palm. The students seemed fully engrossed in the lesson, and there was no hint of confusion in their expressions. Even little Weasley was bobbing his head like a chicken, his face showing he understood, although that remained to be seen. The process of charming runes isn't as straightforward as casting a spell. To enchant this stone card, he gestured to the enlarged hovering card above him, "You'll need to focus on what the rune is meant to do. It's like having a conversation with your magic. The rune asks for guidance, and your charm provides the answer. If your focus wavers or your intent isn't clear, the enchantment might fail." "No, it will fail." The students watched intently as the card slowly descended, landing gently in front of the class. The elevated seating gave everyone a clear view of Maverick's demonstration. "I'll use the Lumos charm," he said, raising his wand. But unlike casting it in the air, enchanting requires direct contact with the crafted item. He held up the wand for emphasis. "Before I begin, I focus on the rune in my mind. I think about its meaning, its purpose, and what I want it to achieve. The Lucy's rune represents illumination, so I concentrate on that idea. Then, I channel my intent into the spell." He flicked his wand gently over the stone card, clearly enunciating, "Lumos," as he tapped the rune. Instead of the typical white light glowing from his wand, the students gasped as a soft, radiant glow spread across the card's surface. The light traced the lines of the Lucy's rune, filling them in slowly until the entire shape gleamed brightly. Moments later, the glow faded from the rune itself, and the crystal embedded on the other side of the card began to emit a steady, brilliant light. "And there you have it," he said, hovering the glowing card back into the air and turning it for the students to see. "The charm has activated the rune, and the card is now a functioning magical item. The runes instructed it to glow, and the charm made that possible." He smiled at the wide-eyed students. "As you can see, the card is glowing much like a Lumos spell. Moreover, it will continue to do so for as long as the runes can draw ambient magic from the environment and stay powered. Even if you aren't holding it, as long as the item is in a magical area, it will continue to shine." But if you're in contact with it, the runes will prioritize drawing magic from you. But don't worry, it's negligible. Runes, especially in simple creations like this, are incredibly efficient. You could hold it all day and not feel a thing. That's because this now completed alchemical creation is the simplest of simple alchemy, with the most basic instructions. And these instructions can be transformed into anything because runes are just like a language. You can ask to do very complicated things by modifying the instructions. For example, to stop glowing at certain times, glow in different colors, or blink at different intervals. You can do anything once you begin to understand the beautiful language of alchemists. He smiled brightly at the eager rows of children. Imagination will be the only thing that can hinder a dedicated alchemist. And I have confidence in all of you to reach apprentice level before your OWLs. The students murmured excitedly, their fascination clear as they exchanged eager glances, barely able to contain themselves, itching to try it on their own. Now, Maverick said with a quiet chuckle, looking at their expressions as he brought the card down. It's your turn. Take your wands, focus on your rune, and picture its purpose. Speak the incantation clearly, and let your magic flow into the stone. If you're not familiar with the Lumos spell, raise your hand, and I'll assist you. A ripple of movement followed as students reached for their wands, their faces a blend of excitement and nervousness. The room buzzed with whispered incantations and concentrated energy as they began their attempts. The Lumos spell was one of the simplest spells, so basic that even Muggle-born students could often learn it just by reading the instructions in their textbooks. With nearly a month between purchasing their supplies and arriving at Hogwarts, most Muggle-born students had already mastered the spell before even stepping foot in the castle. As for the young witches and wizards from magical families, knowing how to cast Lumos was practically a given. It was a spell they learned early, often taught by parents or older siblings. Therefore, only a handful of students raised their hands, struggling with the charm itself. Even for them, it was quickly grasped once Maverick provided one-on-one instructions. Time passed slowly as the classroom filled with focused murmurs and occasional flickers of light. To Maverick's surprise, the first to succeed wasn't Miss Know-It-All or a Ravenclaw but Neville Longbottom. The shy Gryffindor's card began to glow softly, filling him with visible confidence. Well done, Mr. Longbottom. Maverick approached his desk, clapping his hands and offering an approving smile to the boy. 10 points to Gryffindor. Thank you, Professor, Neville replied, brimming with pride. This wasn't due to the effect of the Patronus on his mind. No, this was Neville's own talent. The Patronus had simply allowed him to relax by keeping his mind from dwelling on depressing thoughts. And with that, Neville was able to succeed. The other students turned toward Neville, some surprised, others envious, but above all else, they felt inspired. Not long after, Hermione Granger's card began to glow brightly. Maverick had reset her card after the demonstration, removing his earlier enchantment, so this success was entirely her own. Excellent work, Miss Granger. Maverick nodded approvingly, approaching her desk. Very impressive of you to achieve a near-perfect harmony between the rune's purpose and your intent with the Lumos spell. Hermione beamed at the praise, though she didn't quite grasp the technical terms. She knew it meant something good. Let's see. Maverick hummed, chuckling at the expectant girl. Another 10 points for the Lions. Meanwhile, Ron Weasley, sitting not far from Hermione, muttered his spell with such intensity that his card sputtered like a bulb short-circuiting. Easy, Mr. Weasley, Maverick advised as he passed by. Relax your grip and focus on the rune's meaning. He had to give it to the kid. Ron was clearly trying his best, from what Maverick could see. The Potter orphan, on the other hand, was the fifth fastest of nearly 100 students to manage the enchantment. It was clear the boy was exceptionally talented, and the only thing that had held him back until now was his unfortunate upbringing, lack of magical knowledge, or magic itself. As the minutes went by, more students succeeded. Tracy Davis let out a delighted squeal when her card lit up, while Daphne Greengrass nodded in satisfaction, trying her best to maintain a calm expression but failing miserably as a smug smirk tugged at her lips. Maverick moved among the rows, offering guidance where needed. Steady now. Remember your intent. That's it. Just like that. Eventually, every student managed to produce at least a faint glow on their card. Maverick returned to the front of the room, clapping his hands lightly to draw their attention. Well done, he said warmly. You've all taken your first step toward becoming alchemists. It's not an easy path, but you've done remarkably well for your first attempt. He let his eyes sweep across the classroom, taking in the proud smiles, and the way many students still stared at their glowing cards with a mix of wonder and pride. Remember, enchanting isn't about rushing or forcing the process. It's about creating a connection between you, your magic, and the object you're working with. The better that connection, the better your results will be. While the students excitedly chatted and exchanged proud glances, Maverick glanced at the watch on his wrist and saw that the class was nearly over. He allowed himself a smile as well, then gave the students a moment to enjoy their sense of accomplishment. When it was almost time to mark the end of the class, he cleared his throat and gave one last look at the students. All right, everyone, that's all for today. Well done. Remember, this is just the beginning. If you have any doubts about runes, you can always find me in my office. As the students gathered their things and filed out of the classroom, many of them stopped to thank him, their voices filled with genuine appreciation. They didn't even realize that he had already canceled the Patronus charm that had spread across the class. Their genuine feelings of accomplishment and joy were enough to sustain the positive emotions, making them oblivious to its disappearance. Thank you, Professor, Tracy Davis and Daphne Greengrass said, one smiling politely while the other grinned widely as they walked up to the front before heading out. Neville approached as well, giving him a grateful look. Thank you again, Professor, he said with a voice filled with appreciation. Maverick nodded to all the students, offering a smile of his own and a few kind words to those who personally came up to his desk before they made their way out. The last few students trickled out, leaving Maverick standing leaning at his desk, satisfied with the day's progress.